I joke that the smartphone was the end of society, sort of. I love my iPhone, don't get me wrong, but it hasn't made us smarter, right?
Yeah.
We're more apt to be impatient because we get instant information from Siri. We don't have to pull out an encyclopedia or a map anymore, so we're not really as smart in some things as we used to be. And interestingly, social media has decreased our social skills.
Hey Islanders, and welcome to episode 169 of the Camano Voice. Today I speak with the founder of Camano Counseling. Please welcome Dan Abshere. Hi, I'm Brandon Erickson, and you're listening to the Camano Voice podcast, where I interview local business owners, comedians, singers, and more. I dive into their backstory to find out how they got where they are, what are some of the tips for you to do the same, and find out where they are going. Tune in every week as I interview more of the people you see every day. Hey Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice, where we release a new episode every Tuesday. Hope you guys had a good week. I hope you guys enjoyed, my last episode with Satin. That was a lot of fun to go talk with her and kind of go over all of the different things that they're working on with Safe. And I just got back from a great weekend. I got to have the weekend away with my wife, which was a lot of fun. We've got 4 kiddos, so getting away for the weekend is fairly difficult. But that was a lot of fun being able to go. And we actually got to go to the Emerald City Comic-Con, which we had not been able to do before. And that was just really cool. I've been a nerd my whole life before it was cool. I was into Pokemon and all of those different things well before they had the toys of Pokemon that you could actually purchase. So I'm always jealous of my kids when they get those things because I'm like, I had to make up a plastic animal was a Pokemon. Anyways, but I digress. It was a great time, though. Got to hang out and see a lot of cool people and see some neat speakers. We got to hear David Tennant, which, if anyone listened to Doctor Who or watched Doctor Who, he was a big part of that, and got to see a lot of other neat actors and actresses that were there. So that was a lot of fun. But something stood out. My wife and I were talking about this. Is the nerd community that has obviously it's grown a lot in the last 20 years now. But it gets bigger and bigger, right? Because it expands and it grabs and it holds more and more people. But one thing I've really loved about that community that I've seen is just how accepting they are. There's been so many people that they've brought into the fold and into the group. And every time there's a new person or new group or people or whoever that gets interested and join in, I always feel like it's a very welcoming community. So I just think it's a really cool aspect of that piece. So I'm very proud to be part of that group, and it was really cool to be able to see all of that. So anyways, if that's another, I guess that's a plug. If you ever want to go to Comic-Con, it's great fun. You see some really cool costumes there. Oh my word, that was really cool. Just the amount of work people put into these things. It's just awesome. So anyways, that's my plug for Comic-Con. Check it out and go if you can. Okay, into this podcast. So I got to talk with Dan Abshere, which, as I mentioned in the intro, is the founder of Camano Counseling. And we get into how we kind of got connected the first few times and everything. So I'll let that get in the podcast. But Dan has such a heart for this community through counseling and just wanting to make counseling accessible to everybody. There's a lot of nuggets and things I pulled out of this podcast that I just think are useful in everyday life. There are things you can practice with, these tools that he talks about. And we talk about this, an acronym called STOP. So listen for that in the podcast, and we're going to go and talk through all of that. But there's just so many different pieces to this that I think are just useful that everyone can benefit from. I think counseling is such a useful tool for people to experience. So I'm very excited about this podcast. We had a great time. Dan is just such a great guy. He is so much fun to talk to, and he's hilarious. And like I said, very, very big heart for this community. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Dan Abshere. Hey, Islanders, and welcome to another episode of the Camano Voice. Today I'm here with the founder of Camano Counseling. Welcome to the podcast, Dan Abshere.
Hey, Brandon, how you doing? Thanks for inviting me.
Good. Yeah, so for those of you listeners out there who don't know, there's a second podcast I also host, which is the Welcome to Camano Island podcast, which is put on by the Camano Chamber. And we had Dan on as a guest there. And I enjoyed our conversation so much, and I wanted to dig deeper in a lot of it, that I was like, you need to jump on the Camano Voice so we can go longer at that. So that's why he's here.
But you're not mentioning I was just a fill-in because the original had to back out. So there's a caveat to that.
But it was a good fill. It wasn't a downgrade or anything. It was great.
Thanks.
All right. So before we get started, tell us a little bit about Dan.
Moved here about, 6 years ago? Oh my gosh, 2018.
Wow.
Originally from Fresno, California, and left there after college and traveled the world serving in the Air Force.
Okay, awesome. So you grew up in Fresno. What was that like growing up there?
I loved Central California, not as much as Camano, of course, but because very diverse population and farming, a kind of rural and small town. So I loved the community and the people around that area, but again, not better than Camano.
How was that area? Because so many places have just kind of exploded in population and growth and stuff like that. What is it like for you when you go back to Fresno? Is it completely different?
Well, I think, like a lot of places, crime's gotten worse. Pollution was always a little bit not great. So change-wise, though, I don't go back that much to really tell. I still can't see the mountains because of pollution, and that's one of the reasons I'm living here.
Okay, very cool. So, you said you jumped into the Air Force. Was that something that from a young age you were interested in, or what kind of led you that way?
Oh, it's funny. I told some of my students when I was teaching in school counseling that one of the reasons I wanted to be a pilot was because I thought the TIE fighters had the coolest pilot uniform in the world. So TIE fighter pilots in Star Wars was one funny reason. The other one was I watched Magnum PI, and I was a huge TC fan. I wanted to be TC.
Yeah.
So I wanted to fly helicopters originally, went a different path in the Air Force, but actually got to fly a Loach or Little Bird, McDonnell Douglas 530 in my last deployment. So I got to live my TC dream for one day.
That's awesome. So were you actually went through all the flight training and all that then?
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. So with doing that, was that something that you ever thought, like, once I get out of the Air Force, this is what I'm going to do?
Not really. Funny. I'm kind of different like that. I love flying, but it wasn't my passion. It was a lot of fun. I mean, doing cool things like flying low-level into Micronesia to set up a Chinese refugee camp, and then building, hand offloading supplies to build a church or school, and then going into blackout landings in foreign countries. I mean, that was really cool, right? Or we're staying in a 5-star hotel in some other country. But since college, I started doing some volunteering. One was at a muscular dystrophy camp, and I got the bug to help out kids. I had a hard time growing up a little bit, and I thought that's what I was here for, to help kids that are having a hard time in middle school and high school.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So is that? Did you go to college after getting out of the Air Force then?
Well, I joined the Air National Guard to help pay for college when I was still in high school, and then in college I did ROTC, which paid helped pay a little bit. It was a lot cheaper back then, though, of course.
Yeah.
And then I went active duty Air Force after college.
Okay, so when you went to college, you did go for counseling then at that time?
No,
okay.
I didn't. I needed. It's funny. I originally went in for political science because I thought it was interesting.
Okay.
And then I said, "Whoa, this isn't for me." And I found out that to be a pilot, you could do underwater basket weaving, and no one cares. some like geography sounds cool. And geography was fun, meteorology, but it was a lot easier. I didn't start my counseling education until 2002. But we were a little busy. That was right after 9/11, so that was probably not the smartest thing. And then I had to, so that was the first attempt on my counseling master's, and then the second one was in 2014, I want to say, or 2012. And then I couldn't finish it then either because I got deployed, so I had to wait till I got out of the Air Force to finish my counseling degree.
Okay. So during the time you were in and out of the or like in and out of active duty, you were trying to go and get your counseling and finish that all out.
Yeah, at some point, everybody in the military, if they stay in for a while, and depending on what rank they're at, they have to get a master's. So I just went and got I'm joking, the easy path, Embry-Riddle, which every pilot goes and gets. And the reason I couldn't do the counseling one is because you have to do practicum and internship. So it's a year and a half of practice, which is no way you could get out and do that. And plus, I would move, and then the school would say, "Oh, you're in another state now or another country. You can't do it anymore." So I just had to wait. Okay.
So then, it was during the time you were in the military, though, that you were kind of realizing that you wanted to go in that direction.
In college, I realized I wanted to be a counselor, but I kept trying to get the schooling done, and then I practiced by coaching. I coached every sport, Google coaching, of course. I've only played soccer as a kid. It was all Google, but every sport I could teach for my kids, or football before I had kids. And I did some after-school tutoring too. Something I can do to help kids when I wasn't at work with my family.
Yeah. What were the things that you were noticing? Just because the landscape of what kids go through today, a lot of the way they interact or things like that are probably similar. I know there's patterns and stuff through that, but it feels like a different landscape. So what was it kind of like back then? What were the things you were noticing for these kids?
I guess a couple things. I mean, we all grew up around, drugs, right? And different opinions on that stuff. But now with it legalized, I'm hearing that, smoking marijuana is just as common as us drinking back when we were kids. And both are harmful, but there's a lot of research that's coming out that frequent marijuana use can promote anxiety and depression, which we're seeing for other reasons. The other one is social media, of course, and cell phones. I joke that the smartphone was the end of society, sort of. I love my iPhone, don't get me wrong, but it hasn't made us smarter, right?
Yeah.
We're more apt to be impatient because we get instant information from Siri. We don't have to pull out an encyclopedia or a map anymore, so we're not really as smart in some things as we used to be. And interestingly, social media has decreased our social skills. So, and we talked about this last time. Yes, you can connect to people easier, but the depth of connection is more shallow.
Yeah.
And when you're typing on an iPad or a phone, you're not saying a full sentence, and there's no one next to you. In fact, there was a study I read that I thought was really interesting, that they took kids to a camp where they could use no electronics for, I think it was 5 or 7 days. And what they found at the end was that they were able to read social cues better. So social media, smartphones have made it harder for us to socialize and even control our emotions. A lot of social media increases our anxiety, our depression, because what people post is their best life. And we're like, oh, my life sucks. They call it social comparison, so interesting.
Yeah. Well, and I think all of those pieces are really interesting. The other piece I've heard before is the conversation around high-speed internet, because a lot of, like, my generation grew up with internet, but that means dial-up, which means you were waiting 5 minutes for the page to load.
Oh, yeah.
So you better not click the wrong link, because otherwise 5 minutes later you're like, that's not what I needed.
Yeah.
But just that instant
gratification.
Yeah. And the fact you can go through page to page to page, and most of us in our workday or our regular lives will have 10, 15 tabs open, and
because we can, and because we're like, oh, well, I was doing this thought, so I'm going to open this tab and start researching this.
Yep.
And 2 minutes later, you're like, wait, I forgot. I have to write this email. So you jump into that. Oh, I need to find out that. So, like, you end up with 100 scattered thoughts, but you're not really getting anything done.
And we used to call it multitasking, and they found out that there really isn't such a thing.
Yes.
You can only concentrate on one thing. So you're not as good at that one thing because you're doing multiple. Now it's cool because we can do things fast, right?
Yeah.
Remember, you could only call somebody up on the phone if you want to talk to them. Now you can like text 15 people.
Yeah.
Things are fast. You can get more done. It's cool, but there's just some downsides we've got to be aware of.
Yeah. So, so then you started. So you went and you finally were able to go and finish your master's in counseling. What happened after that then?
So I had to do practicum, and so CAC Rep is the name of the accreditation that for counselors, and that they require 1 practicum and 2 internships. So it's a year and a half after you get your last part of the degree, year and a half of practice. And that time I did some English as a second language teaching, substitute teaching, and a bunch of other teaching, and I did some counseling as well, part-time, that were very rewarding working with kids. I found out I actually like working in elementary schools, which is surprising.
Okay.
The little kids actually, they listen more. It was cool.
Yeah.
But then at the end, with my background, doing a lot of planning and strategy and, seeing a lot of different problems and solving problems and helping people was my passion. And it's hard to do that in a government entity, or in a local government like a public school. So I knew that going into private practice, I could do what I knew was best for the people that are seeking help and for my community.
Yeah. Where do you feel those limitations are? Because we have come to this point where we have school counselors, and we have in speaking with my counselor, he was saying how there was a story that happened where a kid was talking about committing suicide, and his friends who heard about this went to the school counselor and said, hey, our friend is thinking about this. They got in contact with another counselor, they got in contact with the parents, and then they started working through that stuff. That wouldn't have happened 20 years ago, I feel like. So, but within that, there's still limitations. What do you feel are these limitations that they kind of have to work within?
I don't know if it's limitations. I know that we're making great strides, and Washington, finally, or I wouldn't say finally because I don't know what the other 50 states are doing, but they're now embracing putting school counselors in every school. That's very recent and great, but there's more we need to do, right? So why is it that that it takes so long to teach math, to teach English? And I mean, I think we would all argue that it's harder to control our emotions, to be good at socializing with others than it is to do math. But we make it a lot. We don't spend the same amount of time or even close to it. And because we're just now getting school counselors into schools, I think, and I only did school counseling for a year and a half, so I'm not the expert. But we're not as good. We don't have that background and depth of knowledge on like we do in the other subjects. And we were trying to look for curriculum for kids, elementary school kids who are suffering from suicide ideation or self-inflicting behaviors and depression. And there's some, but there isn't really a lot of comprehensive curriculum to teach kids what emotions are, where they come from, and then what are good skills, and then practice those skills. There's some curriculum out there, but as we've learned in business, thank you for the help that you give a lot of us around here, is that businesses are out to make money.
Yeah.
They're not going to spend time on doing what's normally. They're not going to spend time unless there's a profit in it. So a lot of the things that are marketed, I think, may not be comprehensive, or they might just be easy. So, I hope that we keep improving our ability to teach social and emotional skills the same way we do trying to teach math and English, for instance.
Absolutely. And I think that is, one of the biggest challenges. I mean, our kids, we do it's a private school, but it's kind of homeschooling. It's like one of those hybrid-y things. But in that, you're working with your kids, right, day in and day out, and you see them have these wild emotions up and down. And when you've got multiple kids in a household, at some point the youngest gets frustrated and just hits the older one, and you're like, you can't just punch them. Well, I was angry. That's okay that you're angry, but we need to figure out a different outlet for that.
Yep. Yeah, I was just talking about that today, that, challenging our thoughts instead of accepting them and running with them, and perception is reality. So whatever happens, people can perceive it differently. We get to choose what we believe about an event. And teaching kids to challenge their beliefs, I think, is critical. And I don't know if we're there yet.
Yeah. Very cool. So, so then you did some school counseling, and then decided you need to do private practice to really do what you wanted to do there. How did that kind of all come about? Like when you started deciding to leave the school counseling and step into the next step?
Oh man, talk about anxiety. I can't do business. I've never done a business before. I'm a patriot, not a businessman, if you've seen that movie. It was just a trial and error, and persistence, which I think we've talked about. It's funny. The stuff I learned to help to counsel other people, I had to apply to myself a lot. When
the hardest one.
Oh my gosh! So, oh my God, it's the end of the world. How am I gonna? This person won't let me rent from them. And then if you just think about the opportunities, focus on potential opportunities instead of thinking them as catastrophizing problems, something always comes up. And for that instance, I looked at a place where I thought I could rent from, and it came out to be too expensive, or they didn't want to counsel there. And then that person said, "Oh, but go talk to this guy over there. Dr. Cooper is his name." And he's like, "I would love to have a mental health counselor in with me." And it was boom. And now patients come in and they have pain related to anxiety or something else, and we get to cooperate with patients' approval to help people holistically improve their physical and mental and overall well-being. It's awesome.
Yeah. No, I love, I've actually had Dr. Brian Cooper on the podcast before, and he was just he was already started, but he was keep building that structure and all of the things he wants to do. And I think that's awesome, because in the medical industry, I don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but it feels like every single form that you fill out with all your information, everything gets tossed into the wind, and then you go to the next person. They're like, "Okay, just fill this out." You're like, "Well, don't you have this information?" "No, we don't have this information." And so there's no connectivity between one person to the next, one doctor to the next, and so you're starting over, with every single doctor, and the fact that you're able to kind of bring all that together is really cool.
Yeah, it is very cool. About the limitations of the medical, and I'm not an expert. I'm just starting, but interesting that I've never thought how hard it would be to help people use their insurance to pay for things. Mm-hmm. So that's where I spend a lot of my time now. Everyone said, "Hey, you're new. You're not gonna be able to use insurance at all." And I'm like, "Nah, we can figure this out, right? That can't be right." And 6 months later, I'm still trying to help people pay for mental health counseling with insurance, and it's amazing how difficult it's been. But now we're finding workarounds. We're like, all right, if insurance companies won't let us bill them or reimburse, let's start a nonprofit. Let's see if we can have them pay a small fee, like a co-fee or a copay, and then the nonprofit will pay the remainder, and we'll expand access for all. We'll see how it works.
Yeah, that's very cool. So within the counseling then, what are some of the changes that you've noticed in the mental health space over your time as a counselor?
Okay. Well, I haven't, besides starting, my training in 2002, I haven't really been practicing counseling all that long. But obviously, there's been an increase in anxiety, depression, and other disorders, increasing until the pandemic, I think 20% ish, depending on the age you look at and what statistic, and then it just boomed, with the pandemic.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are getting into that quote-unquote space. You see a lot of experts on different social media. You see marketing for it. And, we got to be careful on what we believe and what we go for.
Yeah.
There's some good stuff out there, but there's a lot of popular culture saying, self-care, which is true, but there's a difference between self-care and take care of yourself first versus, good about caring for your or spending time on your health and your exercise. Caring for yourself versus put yourself first are two different things, and it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
So it's good to try to help people and communities get the right kind of techniques to help people, but it's a challenge.
Yeah. So I want to go back to something you said there. You said it was on the rise, mental health, whether that's anxiety, depression, all those things, were on the rise leading up to COVID. And obviously we've seen what COVID has done and everything to that. What did you guys, based on maybe your colleagues or what you've seen, why do you think we were starting to see that rise? On one hand, I feel like throughout my age or my years of growing up, that I've just heard more about it. So like I feel like more things are being tracked, more data, right? But is there also things that from that generation or whatever that you guys feel like, well, these things were factors in that?
I'm probably not the best person to ask that. They're probably doing research on that right now, or still doing research on it. Social media is definitely one of them. I think electronic use, definitely one of them. And I think we're just busier now, those and other reasons, we spend less time with people, kind of like we were talking about. And there's a big connection between the social and the emotional, both in brain development and development in general and how you connect with others. But in the present moment also, if you're not well connected socially, you're going to have a hard time emotionally.
Mm-hmm. So then, for parents out there, if they're raising kids, anywhere along that spectrum, what are things that you would suggest for parents that are raising kids, to increase their social and emotional well-being?
Okay. So I try to teach parents or offer to parents that there's three parts to educating or teaching. I hate to say parenting because who am I to tell somebody how to parent their kid, right? But there's three parts. There's the teaching part, there's the coaching part, and then there's the role modeling. So the teaching part, you got to teach the why. If you really want somebody to understand something and grasp onto it and really incorporate it into their life, you got to teach them the background. So that's something I think we should be doing in schools, and something I try to do in private practice is brain science. How the amygdala works, how it controls your emotions. How hormones, from the amygdala, signaled by the amygdala, control your body, your fight or flight response, and not only does that help them understand you can control it, but also, quote unquote, normalizes it, so they don't feel like they're alone, like it's a normal human response. So the science or the why behind what you want to teach somebody is important, and then the coaching is just practice, and Dr. Kasdan has got I love that guy. He does ABA therapies for kids, and I think his university has a center. And I love where he talks about focusing on the rewards and not so much the punishment. And a lot of us probably heard that, and I'm kind of old school, so I hate to think, I'm not going to be too soft, right? But really, when you're coaching a kid to do something, you want to go crazy in your praise. Good job, bud, good job. Depending on their age, if it's a teenager, it might just be a fist bump or something. Good job. But you got to practice with them, reward them for doing the right thing, and then maybe most of the time ignore the stuff you don't want. If you give somebody attention, if you give an adult or a kid attention for doing something that you don't want to do, what you're doing is reinforcing that. So the coaching and the practicing and the rewarding is very important. And then role modeling. I wouldn't say role modeling is the most important, because some people I've seen where people say, well, they do the right things, but their kid's just not doing it. Well, we haven't done the first two parts. But you could do the first two parts right, but if you aren't role modeling, it's not going to work. They're going to say, look what mom and dad does. That must be the way to act. Yeah. So, and again, I'm not, who am I to say how we should parent, but there's three parts. You got to teach them, and you got to practice and coach with them, and then you got to role model.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, and I think those are important. And I do feel between my wife and I, we've been working in that of like, how do we want to parent our kids? And, obviously, every parent that steps into parenting, the only little bit of playbook you have is, what did my parents do? Which is a very, very small sample size.
Yeah.
And all they had was, what did my parents do?
Yeah.
And if you're breaking family, generational trauma or generational ways of things, which both of our parents were doing that, they had to figure it out on their own. And so then we're getting a step up from that because we don't have to deal with our own trauma in that.
Right.
And we get to use that as an example and then build from that. But that is something that every parent enters into this at a different level, at a different stage.
Yeah.
And we all see the world differently. I mean, you look at Facebook or anywhere where there's something political gets thrown out,
Yeah.
there's a million different responses of different viewpoints of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree that it, what skills we come into anything, parenting in this case, is our starting point, and it can be very painful for someone to try to coach their kid when they don't have the same skills. I mean, that's me. I didn't grow up having good emotional and social skills, so that's why I struggled. My mom, God bless her soul. Well, she's still alive. No, I'm not saying that she's not around, but she's a single mom, had to raise 4 kids. So, she didn't have time or the knowledge to teach me how to control my emotions and socialize with others. So I had to learn as I grew up. But that also taught me the importance of teaching my kids that. Became my mission, and maybe why I want to help others. There's also some good research out there that the skills we come in with, that determines how we handle events, like whether it's post-traumatic stress or post-traumatic growth. But in those struggles, as in parenting, your kids are going to learn how. They're going to watch you. You're role modeling how you handle those things, and struggling is not a bad thing. In fact, I'd say it's beneficial.
Yeah.
I mean, if your kids are important to you, aren't they worth struggling for? Do you struggle at work? Yeah. Aren't your kids more important than work? And struggling is a good thing. That's how we succeed in life, by facing problems, not running away from them, and overcoming them, persisting through them. And our kids are going to see that. And they're going to say, if my parents can struggle, I'm actually stealing this from my favorite books. If my parents can struggle, then struggling must be good.
Yeah.
And I can struggle.
Yeah. That's very cool. So then, with that then, another thing I want to ask you about for practicality's sake is, we are living in a digital age. There's new things, there's more things coming out every day. And again, parenting is going to be on the spectrum, right? There's some parents that are going to let their kids, the digital world is here, so let's let them do everything digital because that's what they're going to live in. And then there's the other end of the spectrum of, I didn't need it when I was a kid, they don't need it now, so they're not getting it till they're out of the house.
Yeah.
But in there, what are just tips and tricks that you feel are useful for parents to be aware of when it comes to screen time, social media, things like that?
Well, that's tough, right? Because aren't we on our phones all the time?
What? No.
Who
What
are
was
we
that?
to say our kids shouldn't be on the phone all the time, right? I mean, before the pandemic, I heard, 1 hour of screen time a day. Not possible when you're learning at home. So I've heard lately 2 hours a day, and I'm still struggling with that, how to teach it and how to parent it. But I think, going back to the struggle, it's a conversation with your kids. It's teaching them why, and they're going to get, excuse my language, they're going to get pissed, right?
Yeah.
All my friends are on all day. They're doing games all day. They're on their phone all day. They're on this stuff. Well, you got to teach them that they're for instance, for social media, a necessary evil, I call it. There's pros and there's cons. You have to use social media to be able to connect, to be able to market, to be able to do daily life. But there's also some downsides. So get involved with what your kids are doing. They're not going to like it at first, but over time they'll get to understand if you are open to the conversation. It's got to be a conversation. Again, why? Teach them why. Why am I involved with this? Why am I limiting it? And use that. They call it Don't use the authoritarian style. Use the authoritative. Authoritarian would be like, it's because I said so. You may have a good reason, but kids are going to be like, that's not enough for me.
Yeah.
Authoritative is, hey, here's why this is not a good idea. You can choose to limit yourself, but I know you're not ready for that, so I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
And then reward them. Set up a reward system, and reward them with more screen time when they do those things you want them to do. It's a long process. It's painful, but there's no job better in the world, right? Mm-hmm. So it's worth it.
Yeah. No, that's really good. I think that's something we struggle with all the time. We go back and forth. It's like, a lot of times for us, it's attitudes, right? So like, we notice that if, especially our youngest, because he's the youngest and probably most influential, and there's a 3-year gap there, and it's something we're really learning that the other, the 3 oldest kids are very close together, but the youngest one, that 3-year gap is fairly significant at their age. So like, there's things that the 3 older, when they do something or watch something or play something, it doesn't affect them as heavily as the youngest.
Right.
So, we're trying to learn that, like, how do you parent multi-aged kids that have enough of a split that it does make a difference?
Yeah, I haven't figured that one out great either, especially on like movies, Okay, yeah, you can watch PG-13, you can watch R if it's with me, you are still on G. So, sometimes maybe that's a good opportunity to spend one-on-one time with one of the kids.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you can watch, I don't know, pick your movie that's, probably you wouldn't let them watch alone, and you're hesitant to let them watch, but you're like, okay, yeah, watch it with me. And then you let your other son or daughter go watch something else in their room or after they go to sleep. But yeah, that is tricky.
Yeah. Very cool. So, what are your hopes for specifically in the San Juan Camano area in the mental health space? I know that's now you're kind of getting started and all of that. What are your goals there?
Well, really, my goal is to really help people and enjoy doing it. So I'm trying to get that balance, right? And in helping people with regard to mental health, it's about helping people access it. That's a big problem everywhere right now, right? It's, is it cost effective because insurance won't pay a lot of counselors or won't reimburse it? Or do they not have insurance, or there's something I learned recently called underinsured. If you've got a $4,000 deductible, then you're really not using your insurance until you pay out of pocket $4,000, and who can do that? And because insurance is so hard, a lot of counselors have decided not to accept insurance, or some of them. I know I've been trying to get insurance to pay for a couple of people, and I know some of my clients have been trying to get reimbursed for 6 months. And if you want to call and check, you're on hold for an hour.
Yeah.
So one thing I'm looking forward to doing is we mentioned it earlier before, is maybe working with a nonprofit and trying to get some grants to help counselors pay or reduce the cost. So for instance, if it's a new counselor like me who can't bill insurance, then I charge $40, $50, whatever the quote fee is, and then the insurance company or the nonprofit reimburses maybe. And then for those who don't use insurance because it's a struggle to work with them, then maybe we encourage them by that. Hey, you don't have to go through your insurance company. Just charge them $50, and we'll give you the rest of your fee.
Wow.
This is going to be hard to do. I know it sounds Pollyannish, but I think it's a first start. And then we got to work on legislation, right? A lot of times they point to rules that aren't really there, and I'm not an expert, but we got to work on legislation to help make it easier to find counselors that are willing to take more insurance and increase the training so there's more out there.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think that's something that has helped me so much in counseling, is just it's that kind of that process going in and out of it, of just working through things, because we all go through life. And I always, when I talk about myself counseling, part of the reason I pull that up is I think if most people saw my life on a spectrum, they would be like, you kind of had a perfect life growing up. No one has a perfect life growing up. But as far as perfect lives go, like, I had 2 great parents. I found my wife very young, and we matched well. Like, we just have gone through life young together and have continued to work on that and be on that same page as we go through.
Cool.
And I still feel like I still need counseling. And so for anyone that falls out of that side, I'm like, they need it. But the other thing is that cost and those availability of, like, on one hand, there's a lot of counselors that are booked out for a long time, so they can't get in.
Yeah.
And then 2, it's that cost.
Yeah.
And I think that's the important piece of being able to bring this down to everyone, because I think everyone will benefit from it.
Yeah, totally. So San Juan Camano Area Foundation, and I'm gonna throw somebody under the bus for the next year. When you ask me who I'd recommend, Michelle Meany, she's starting a nonprofit to provide group therapy for those that are comfortable, and for anxiety, for instance. Everyone experiences that. It's part of the human existence. It's part of what we go through, and we got to learn to deal with it and not worry about it, not run away from it. That's a great thing to teach skills for in a group setting.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, going back to what you were saying on. Hit me one more time.
Accessibility or just getting
I suck. What was the original question?
I don't know. I was going off on my own story. But just kind of that idea of, regardless of what level you're at.
Oh yes, So I apologize. The tools, we can get them out. We can get tools out to people through groups, through increasing individual counseling, and then I think we also need to start teaching it younger.
Yeah.
Kind of like we were saying at the beginning. Get those lessons to kids in school where they're learning about how brain science, how the body works, and that it's normal. And that they can, because right now a lot of times we teach people to avoid it. And I don't mean teach in schools, but in general, we teach people anxiety's bad, depression's bad, run away from it, which is the exact opposite of what you want to do. So we need to get those skills to kids at a younger age. And because it is, skills we all need to be able to control emotions and socialize and succeed in life.
Yeah. Well, and one of the biggest tools I feel like I'm continually... that has been come up multiple times throughout counseling for me is curiosity. And when you have those feelings, when you have these moments where you're not sure, like, why did I think that? Why did I do that? Why did I react so quickly that way? Is to pause and reflect on it, and don't be angry at yourself, because I can't believe you did that. That's usually my response. And don't be disgusted with yourself. Like, I can't believe I had that thought. But be curious. Why did I think that way? Why, when it comes to all these different pieces, why? And then you're looking at whatever the reaction was as an object. Not as yourself that you did this, but as this object of why?
Yeah, that's awesome. I talk about that a lot of times, and I, just like you, I'm cool that you say that, because I'm the same way. I have low self-worth a lot of times, and I always think the worst of what people are thinking of me or myself in general. So you want to, when you feel that anxiety, frustration, or sadness, whatever it is so STOP is an acronym that I use sometimes. Just stop for 1 second, or stop for half a minute, and just say, hey, I'm feeling something. Take a breath. Just call it a parasympathetic breath. Inhale through the diaphragm, exhale as slow as you possibly can, and it just slows your body down, and the hope is that it puts it into a parasympathetic state, which is the opposite of fight or flight. And then observe with curiosity and without judgment, what am I feeling, what am I thinking? And the way you said it was really key is a lot of times we'll feel or think something and we'll immediately judge ourselves. Mm-hmm. And there's a guy who invented REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Theory, Dr. Ellis. I like how he said it. He's like, why would you never score a run in baseball or get an A on a test and say, I'm the best baseball player ever, or I'm the best mathematician ever.
Yeah.
Why do you make one mistake or do one thing not perfect and you say you're the worst person ever?
Yeah.
But that's our tendency. So looking at it as if it's not yourself, like you're watching a movie or a train go by, and observing it as an outside observer with curiosity is the way, and they call it metacognition. You know, what am I thinking about and why, but without judgment. I love that you bring that up.
Yeah. And just because I think I might have missed it in there, what's the P stand for in the STOP acronym?
Oh, I'm sorry. Proceed to do something. So that's where the skills come in. Yeah, STA wouldn't really work very well, would it? Or STO. There's a bunch of different stuff you can do. One thing that I'm trying to learn to get better at for myself and to help others is called distress tolerance. Don't run away from whatever's making you feel anxious or frustrated or sad, because that creates that neural pathway to want you to run away every time. So you want to just sit in it. I heard somebody I did training with a couple weeks ago say, like a buddy, put your arm around it. Come on, man, we're going to do this. And humor works. And it's going to go away in about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So the longer you learn to sit with your anxiety or your frustration or your sadness, the more you tolerate it, the less it makes you feel anxious and depressed or frustrated.
Yeah. It's funny, you say all this stuff. It's funny to me how many times mental and physical health relate to each other. Because when you were talking about all those different things about sitting with it and just pushing through that and just waiting there with it, reminds me of when I was going through a phase where I was attempting to do cold showers. And me as a kid, I was terrible, like when it comes to cold at all. As soon as it hit, I would run away. I'd be like, nope, can't handle it. But I was practicing, like, okay, I'm just going to push through this and see what it's like.
Cool.
And so, I look up strategies. They're like, set a timer on your watch for like 20 seconds.
Yep.
So you're going to do 20 seconds in this, and then you can jump out and do whatever you want. But it was eventually your body actually regulates to it. And you stop shivering, and your body just is calm. And you're like, this is weird. I've never felt this, being this cold and not like having to jump out of it.
Yep.
And it was reminding me of that, like from a mental perspective, that same thing.
Yep. Yeah, I think it goes back to cognitive behavior theory, which is what you think and believe is what you'll feel, and then that's how you'll act. So, if you believe that you're freezing, that you're cold, you're going to actually feel those things in your body. And sometimes practice this at home. Just if you're in a cold situation or hot situation, tell yourself the opposite. If it's hot out, it's cold around here. It's cold, and if you actually try to believe it, you'll start feeling less hot. Going back to exercise and the physical, I know Will Smith's got a lot of junk lately, right in the past year, but he had a really cool Nickelodeon speech, I think it was, if anybody wants to look it up, where he talks about running and persistence, and he says he loves to run because you get to practice that thing on your shoulder, that the belief in cognitive behavior theory, that little voice says you can't do it. And you get to tell them, yes, I can. And you keep going. And you learn to persist and keep going. And exercise is probably one of the best things to help us with the mental. If you're talking about physical and mental, you release those neurochemicals, the same ones that make you happy, make you less stressed out. And it'll help, especially in the morning, really helps you throughout the day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I think those are all like, there's so many things you've said throughout this that I'm like, man, each one of those pieces, like if you just take that and write it on a note card and just put it somewhere that you're going to see it. So you're like, oh, when this happens, I need to stop. And then write your acronym and go through those steps. Because as you practice these and go through these, you start to be able to deal with different things and handle things differently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When you start to look at something not as the end of the world, then you can see it for what it is, and you can choose how you want to perceive that. And my hope is that working with Michelle, throwing her under the bus, and some other people, that we can get those tools, those skills out to the community and help them in a way that will be very cost effective or nothing to people, and whether it's individual counseling groups or in schools.
Yeah, that's awesome. So we've talked a lot about counseling and stuff like that. So now that you're no longer in the school system and stuff like that, what would you say your specialty is within counseling? What are you really going to be focusing in on?
Well, I've done a lot with the anxiety piece, trying to help people learn how that works and how they can control it. But especially have a heart for helping students and veterans and first responders. But I want to help anyone in my community.
Yeah.
Camano's my home. So no matter the background or the issue, in my first supervisor, I'm sure she's not listening, told me you can't help people over 70. You haven't been trained in geriatrics. And I'm like, why would I turn away someone in need? Yeah, I'll definitely say, hey, there's somebody more experienced. I'd love to connect you to someone with more skills, but a lot of times, it's hard to find someone. So, I'll help anyone who's in need. But those are my probably the people that I'm probably the most skill or experience with.
Yeah. And then what do you see as the future of Camano Counseling?
So we're working with a nonprofit to help make individual counseling more accessible. I would love to start. I was talking to somebody about providing persistence or emotional and social skills training to first responders, to help prevent PTSD and better handle traumatic events, because our first responders are out there putting their lives on the line every day, right? And I'd love to do that with the military, but I'd have to call it combat effectiveness training probably, so it doesn't sound so fluffy. Which is true though, like you were saying, you come into a situation with certain skills you grew up with, and not everybody's the same. So, there's a lot of times that I was scared, doing different things in the military or down on myself when things didn't go right. And if I would have had those skills, I would have been more effective. Yeah. And I'd love to bring those skills to our veterans in active duty and people who are out of active duty now, to help them not only be effective in their current job, but also to deal with things they've gone through and be more happy and successful.
Yeah. Well, and what you're saying there too, I think is so important. I think a lot of people see mental health or the mental health space. Hopefully it's changing, but historically it's been, well, if you've got issues, that's where you go.
Yeah.
But I've seen, I enjoy watching like gaming competitions or soccer, sports and stuff like that. And the amount of, there's a certain amount of skill that you have to get to be effective on the field or in a game or something like that. But when it comes to the actual competition and the piece like that makes or breaks it in a tournament, boils down to your mental strength. Mm-hmm. It's so fascinating to me when you see that, if you watch certain games, you just see they broke mentally. And all of a sudden they make these dumb mistakes over and over and they lose. They were winning and they lost.
Or somebody comes back in the second half.
Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah. Like, it's the mental health that makes it or breaks it. It's not your skills. There's a level that you need, but past that, it's your mental capability.
The persistence, the ability to see a situation as an opportunity and not a problem.
Yeah.
And almost everything in life can be seen one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think we've all experienced traumatic events. If we persist through it, we can look back saying, wow, that probably happened to me for a reason. I'm now a better person, a better father, a better counselor, whatever, because I dealt with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, again, I hope people go back through this podcast and take notes on some of these things, because I do think there's just so many tools that you've mentioned today that will be really helpful as we move forward. And so thank you.
Appreciate it.
I like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions. So the first one is, what purchase of $100 or less have you enjoyed the most in the last 3 months?
Oh, boy. Bought my wife a present that I can't. Oh, she's not gonna watch this. Yeah, it's a nurse's, or she's a phlebotomist, a Hawaiian outfit that she can wear at work.
Okay, awesome. All right. Who is the most influential person outside of your family in your life?
Well, let's see. Besides the TIE fighter pilot and TC from Magna PI, I guess I have a friend named Don who helped me learn to look at myself and how I can be a better person rather than trying to change others. When I was, he was my boss, about 10 years ago in the military, and he made me a better man. So, I appreciate Don for that.
That's great. All right, this is a fill in the blank question. I know this is weird, but I've always wanted to blank.
Play electric guitar. That was easy.
So, out of curiosity, do you have one sitting in your garage that
yeah.
you're like, someday I will play you?
Oh yeah, I bought it in college. So, yeah, I went to college 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Okay, 30 years ago. It's been sitting there.
I remember when I was getting into guitar for a while, I was like, oh yeah, I really enjoy this. And there was a hand-me-down one that I got, and I was like, perfect, I can play on this. And then I went to the guitar store because I was like, well, I'm kind of learning about guitar. And as soon as you walk in, you're like, oh, yeah, no, I can see myself playing that one. And then you look at the price tag, you're like, nope, few thousand, okay, save up for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good thing I did not buy that. But I'm glad you still have that hopes and dreams, and I believe in you. You can do it. All right, we've already hit on the interesting and fascinating person to interview next. So the last one I'm going to ask you, and this should be a good one because you're also a counselor, what piece of advice would you give your 20-year-old self?
Oh boy. It's probably what Don and others have taught me is to, no matter what happens, no matter what situation, what other people do, we have the ability to recognize and manage our thoughts and our emotions and our actions. And that's all we can do in life is control ourselves. We can't control others. So
Absolutely.
Dwelling on what others or other situations might have done or did is just pointless and makes it worse.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it.
All right. And Islanders, I will talk to you on the next one. Well, a big thank you to Dan for joining me on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. If you haven't already, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform. It really helps us be found by other Islanders like yourself. And for more information on this episode, you can go to CamanoCommons.com/podcast. That's CamanoCommons.com/podcast. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.